Great. Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thanks so much for joining us. Theresa Battaglia is going to be kicking us off today. So Theresa, I will go ahead and hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Kelsey. Welcome, everyone, to AFP Chicago's virtual workshop, Harnessing the Power of Storytelling, Advice for 2020 and Beyond. Good afternoon, and thank you for being here. I'm Theresa Battaglia. I am the AFP Chicago Vice President for Continuous Learning for 2020. My day job is Donor Relations and Stewardship Manager for DePaul College Prep. Thank you once again for being here. We know in these difficult and uncharted times, it's extremely important that we all stay connected to learn from one another. So in an effort to keep and try and keep as much normalcy as possible, we want to take the time to acknowledge our current fellow class. The Fellows Program was created in 2004 to offer development professionals both educational resources and the collective professional expertise of our membership. Each of these individuals represents our rich and diverse Chicago philanthropy community, and we are glad that our Fellows class of 2020 is joining us today. Secondly, I'd like to take a moment to thank our pioneer sponsor, Advocate Aurora Health, for their generous support in funding our programming, as well as our IDEA Education Scholarship Fund sponsor, Campbell & Company, These sponsors make it possible for us to extend our programs to a group of emerging fundraising professionals across the city free of charge. Before we get started today, just a few housekeeping items. I'm sure you've all learned your Zoom by now, but to keep our audio as clear as possible, we have intentionally muted all of your lines. If you have a question for our panelists, please use the chat feature located at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. An evaluation will be sent following today's presentation. It will include a link to the recording of today's session. Now I'd like to turn things over to Stacy Mallow, Vice President of Business Development at Resignos. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Theresa. So today we are bringing together three wonderful nonprofit professionals, and they are representing the arts, education and youth development, and human services. And we're going to be exploring a topic that we know is always popular among fundraisers: how to communicate the importance of philanthropy to your organization and then share stories about the impact of its work. I know they have a lot of great ideas to share with you, but we're also going to speak to the ways that their storytelling has had to change and evolve in response to the events of this year. I do want to let you know that unfortunately our moderator, Angel Gutierrez, is sick today and he is unable to join us, but we want to wish him a speedy recovery and we hope to have him join us for another AFP workshop in the future. I'm going to take Angel's place today as the moderator, and I'm really looking forward to a great discussion with our three amazing panelists that we have with us today. Our first panelist is Andrea Martin. She is the Director of Communications at 1 Million Degrees. We have Jose Munoz, the Executive Director at La Casa Norte. And then we have Scott Pedraza, who is the Director of the Fund for Lyric at Lyric Opera of Chicago. So again, we want to thank you all for being with us today and thank our panelists for joining us for what we are thinking will be a great timely topic as we are pretty much experiencing this global pandemic on both a personal and professional level. So the first question that I want to open up to the panel today is, what are some of the biggest challenges that you faced with respect to storytelling and communications in the past 8 months?
Sure, I'll go ahead, Andrea.
Okay, thank you. I will kick it off. Thanks so much, Stacy. And I just want to say I'm happy to be here with all of you today. The past 8 months have been quite a ride, and we have, we've been trying to ride the wave as best as we can. I think the most challenging thing probably has been continuing to engage our audiences without a really strong repository of new content. So pictures, video, stories, the things we often use to tell great stories. Those are things that we typically collect throughout the year. And this year, without being in the office, without having face-to-face interaction with our scholars, even with our staff, of course, with our donors, it's been a real challenge to source that content. So we've tried to do it remotely. We've tried to stay in touch as best as we can. We've asked our scholars to send selfies, our coaches to send selfies. We've done even more interviewing. We've called scholars, called coaches, just set up a lot of appointments to try to keep them engaged and get their feedback. There's been a lot, of course, to happen over the course of the summer, and everyone's been impacted in different ways. And it's been really important for us to get those stories firsthand. And we found that that really does happen best over the phone, over Zoom, especially with our audience. You know, email just isn't always the best way. So I would say it's been a huge challenge that we have tried to overcome as best as we can by just really infusing that personal interaction that is a staple of our program and the way we support our scholars each and every day. And in the storytelling aspect, we've really just kind of doubled down on being there, trying to be, you know, in person as much as possible to understand how the past, 8 months have impacted them.
And I'd like to add that, to what Andrea said. First of all, thank you everyone for allowing me to panel. One of the difficult things has been how we engage our volunteers. A lot of times, especially in the work that we do, one of the ways that we engage folks with our story is to make them a part of the story. So individuals come out, they volunteer, they help provide meals, they help collect items for the individuals that we serve. They volunteer in various different programs. And this year, because of COVID, we really had to scale that back. And so for those individuals who have been a part of volunteering for years, it just, they remember the work that we did. But for new individuals who are connecting with us for the first time, makes it very difficult for them to see and be a part of the work that we're seeing. And so we've had to not only figure out how we're going to engage new individuals, but also keep those individuals that were volunteering before to stay connected to the work that we're doing. And in a lot of ways, we hear the word pivot a lot. Everybody's been pivoting all year round, but how do you pivot from volunteering to providing in-kind, to providing actually cash donations? Because in a lot of ways, that's what we needed more than ever during this pandemic. Because we're used to doing a lot of our work with the volunteer base and we've had to reduce it, we'd have to make sure that we have paid staff that are doing some of the work that normally would have been done with volunteers. And so that's been a big challenge this year, and just again, getting people to be a part of that story.
I think for Lyric, our biggest challenge is really just sort of restructuring, re-engaging with our audiences in very drastically different ways. I mean, because we have a product on our stage and that people come and they can see opera and they experience it live, and there's nothing like the power of, a live voice singing, and suddenly that's not possible. We really had to just kind of reconsider what our, how we can provide for our mission in a virtual environment, and quickly. So, how can we transition those things? So we've learned, how to probably better utilize video to share some of those components and really sort of bolster digital content that speaks to our core mission. Whereas because we have sort of a product, which is a little bit different than, my other presenters here, we had like sort of a sales team and then a philanthropy team, right? And so we really had to figure out a way to combine them so that we can sort of sell people on the mission rather than sell the next performance or ask people to invest in our product.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, what you guys all mention is, this is just where we're at, and we're trying to do the best, as Jose said, to pivot. That is, I think, the word of the year. I know that, sometimes we say it's daily, sometimes it's hourly, that we have to pivot because we're really in this constant ever-changing world with what is happening with this global pandemic. I would love to hear, we talked a little briefly about, what you are doing and, how, have you really gone to figure out where do you get this story reserve? I'd love for any of you to kind of touch on how you're rethinking that. I feel like it's always a challenging thing to figure out what kind of story you're going to tell. And in the last 8 months, it's been even more difficult to think about how it's going. So I'd love to hear, really what you have found to be successful in these pivot moments, and how you're thinking about creating stories for now, and then also thinking about as we continue into the future with this.
Sure. One of the things that we did early on was to start collecting as much footage as we could of the work that we were doing, and not just capturing stories, but also capturing day-to-day work, most random things that were happening in the building or with clients, because we knew that it was important not just to tell our story, but to make it easier for other folks to tell our story. And so early on, during this pandemic, we got some news coverage about the work that was happening at La Casa Norte, um, because one, we had reporters that wanted to come out and talk about the work that we were doing, but also we made it very easy for them to tell our story. We had collected enough footage for them to be able to use as B-roll when they were telling their news stories. We had a library of information, of video and content and individuals and footage of the different sites and the work that we were doing. And that just made it very easy for a news reporter to use that footage. So over the last few months, there's a few news clips that are out there, and many of the stations used our footage. So it wasn't just enough to go out there and record with an iPhone and get a story out there. We had to invest in making sure that we had not just the footage, but that it was high quality enough for it to be used in TV production. And so that's one piece of advice that I would give folks out there, that if you have an opportunity to collect video and to use a good camera and good equipment and good sound, to make sure that you're not just taking the story, but you're taking all the other work and B-roll and things around the building that are happening, or the services you're providing, because it's just going to make it much easier for those out there who are looking for that kind of footage.
I would say for us, I wish we had started much earlier with our video, Jose. That would have been very, very helpful. For us, particularly because of the students we serve, about 90% of the students, 1 million degrees serves, are Black and Brown students. And with everything that happened this summer through the pandemic, healthcare related things, the systemic racism and everything that happened racially in our country, we really decided that our stories have to reflect what our scholars are experiencing. Previously we really had told a lot of stories that talked about our program, that talked about our services, that talked about how our volunteers were making an impact. And those were really great stories, and they're still great stories, but we really wanted to respond to the times. And so we leaned into, what is this experience really like for our scholars? And it was, we were a little unsure about how, our questions would be received, how to approach it, because it was difficult. It was difficult not only for, our audiences externally, but also internally as well. It was a difficult time, but we knew that was the way that we were going to get to our scholars. They're our most important asset, the most important part of what we do. And I'm really proud of us for taking the leap, kind of a risk as it felt, but again, just talking to them, kind of being delicate in it and approaching them and saying, we want to understand how this is impacting you because we really want to understand what we can be doing better as an organization to support you in these types of circumstances, of course, but across the board, what do you really need? And so for us, that did become the stories for 1 Million Degrees. We talked to our scholars and asked them very specifically, how are you feeling? What's happening? Let us know how this is really impacting you on a day-to-day basis. A lot of them had lost jobs. A lot of their families had lost jobs. A lot of their families had become sick with COVID. And for us, it was really about addressing it head on. And like I said, being delicate about the questions and the approach, but doing that really with that personal connection. We did that with our program coordinators, who are the people who interact with our scholars on a daily or weekly basis, the people who know them best. And we talked to them and said, we really would like for you all to forge these conversations, to forge these relationships that you already have, and just kind of build on that and just let them know that we want to know how this is impacting you. Ask for permission to use the story as we see fit. And that's kind of the approach we've taken for our annual appeal that we're working on right now. We're talking to a coach and scholar pair, really getting an understanding of how they leaned into their relationship over the summer, how it's manifested and how it's been helpful. And that will be the story that we tell for our annual appeal.
Yeah, for us, and we've had to pivot in many different ways, but one story that I really like telling is about the ensemble members of the Patrick G. and Shirley W. Ryan Opera Center, which is Lyric's sort of premier training center, and talking about how different their training has to be within these new COVID parameters, and figuring out how they started training from home and remotely and virtually and through Zoom and things like that, and being able to share how that's really how different their world is because of that. One instance that I really liked sharing was one of our members had recently not only gone through COVID, moved to Chicago, and is now navigating that world, but had also welcomed his second baby. And so how he's managing all of that, but also, and I think this is what kind of was really important for our donors, is making sure that they knew that we're taking good care of our artists, making sure that they stay healthy and that to the best possible they're staying employed and that they're continuing their training, and there's going to be a future for the art form once we're able to reconvene safely. So that's I think an important element of our storytelling at this time, is not just that we're not lying dormant. We are continuing to move the art form forward in ways that are innovative, but are still safe. So once we get through the end of this, we're not just going to be back on stage business as usual. We're actually going to be elevated, and not in all of the ways, including what Andrea was mentioning too, is this was a great opportunity for us to pivot some of our practices with regard to IDEA, and make sure that we're taking this time to ask ourselves hard questions and hopefully move forward and progress, not only as an art form, but as a company immediately. So we've had a lot of new donors sort of engage with some of the practice changes that we're making, and they seem very excited about the direction in which we're going, and that's really, I think, been elemental to our current story.
Great. Thank you, guys. I have, I know some of you are writing in kind of on the chat on the side, so I'm trying to kind of keep an eye on that as well. And we did have someone ask a little bit. I know that you guys have said, what organization you're with, but they did ask a little bit if you can just explain a little bit of maybe what your mission is and what your organization does. And then I'd also like to open it up again to you guys to just as we're talking through this. I think the other thing is not only, are we trying to find the content for these stories that we're telling, but then it's also about, how do we get it out there? So, Jose talked about video. We know that the multi-channel approach, normally is always where we have to go, but from a direct mail standpoint, email, all of that, I'd love to hear, if there's been any success too of really trying to reach people where they are. And how that's affected to these past 8 months. So like I said, if you guys can talk a little bit about that, and also when you start, just say a little bit too on the mission of your organization.
Sure. So, so I'm with La Casa Norte. We serve youth and families who are experiencing homelessness. We provide shelter, housing, and food access programs. In both on the south side of Chicago, north side of Chicago, we have facilities that provide shelter, and we also have a drop-in center in both of those areas, specifically in the back of the yards at Humboldt Park areas. We also provide housing programs throughout most of the western suburbs and collar counties of Cook. I'd say that, you mentioned channels, how do you tell your story? And, it's, the same thing you hear all the time. It's every channel. You gotta hit them all. You gotta still keep getting, I mentioned getting in front of, getting news stories out, making sure that you're still pitching and sharing information about the work that you're doing, staying relevant with what's going on externally, so that, you can connect your mission to what's happening out there. You still need to do social media. We need to do the writing. We need to have, what I'm doing a lot more of now is individual phone calls and smaller cluster meetings with some of our major donors, just to talk about what's going on. But in all of those channels, the most important thing that you can do is to be authentic and to share real life experiences about what's happening now. That's what folks want to hear. And I mentioned these smaller donor meetings that I'm having, and these are very intimate conversations with about at most 10 individuals that we're hosting. And we have a candid conversation about what's going on. We're all being impacted by this pandemic. And many of the individuals want to hear how the pandemic is impacting the individuals that we serve, the youth in particular. Early on, it was about the fact that we had the shelter in place order, and what we were sharing there was really happening. You had 112 food pantries that shut down across the Chicago area. We had places and individuals would normally shelter in during the day, particularly youth, shutting down. So that includes libraries, restaurants, any place that an individual could find shelter in was now shut down. And so that just pushed many individuals who were to seek out more services. And then on top of that, we take a system that was already strained and added more individuals who were losing jobs, who were already on the cusp of homelessness, who are now in need of services. We had families that were losing jobs and needed meals. And, sharing what was happening in the community, what we were seeing in Chicago, and at the same time, sharing what we were doing about it. The fact that we, was doubled the amount of individuals that were coming in for food and groceries. The fact that we had a line around the corner of individuals that were looking for groceries and meals, youth that were telling us that they were scared that they would catch COVID and lose the ability to come into the shelter because we wouldn't let them in because they were infected. Trying to, so all these stories were things that we needed to share with our donor base and have a conversation. So, and many of them shared their story and how, they were, while they were struggling, some of them had the ability to be able to, in the comfort, to be able to shelter at home. And so as hard as it was on them, it wasn't as hard as it was for some of the youth that we're serving. And that just opened up the dialogue to have that conversation. But we were only able to do that because all these conversations were happening, like I said, in smaller settings. At the same time, we have all these news stories that are going out and all the information that we're sharing on social media. So all of those things have to be connected, integrated, and most importantly, they have to be authentic.
I'll go next. At 1 Million Degrees, we are the only organization in Chicago exclusively committed to serving and graduating community college students. So we are an autonomous organization, but we do work closely with city colleges of Chicago, all 7 campuses, and 3 suburban campuses as well. The most unique part about our program is that we have pre-COVID an embedded model where our program staff is located on the campus of each of the schools we partner with. They have an office, and that really allows them to engage with students in that, one-on-one FaceTime interaction that is really, really critical in trying to, avoid some of the pitfalls that students face, especially community college students, in the challenges of juggling life and often work and caring for family while attending school. So our program offers tools and guidance and resources that really fill in the gaps for community college students and make a big difference in their ability to stay in school and earn a degree, and either move on to a job or a bachelor's degree program. We have about 75% of our scholars who do end up going on to a bachelor's degree program, either right away or within about 2 years of completing their community college degree. I would say, as far as channels, there are a couple of things that we've been doing over the past 8 months. We have seen for us, our email open rates as well as our social media impressions have increased. I think everyone's on the computer a lot more, even more than they were before. So we've really tried to lean into that, particularly social. And the key, to social media is it hasn't changed, but it's consistency. Making sure that we are present really frequently and not only telling stories specific to our scholars or our volunteers or our incredible staff, but also just keeping our audience aware of how the pandemic and the systemic racism issues were impacting community college on a broader scale. So, sharing stories about that, sharing opinions about that, and really just leaning into what is the social media content that makes sense for our audience to see, to be aware of, and really staying on top of the consistent publication of different social media posts. That's been really key for us, and I think it has complemented our open rates and impression rates for email and social media. So we've really leaned into that. We also have consultants. We do have PR consultants that we work with on a contract basis. It's something that our CEO really thought was a good idea for us a few years ago as we were especially trying to grow the organization, especially with having a small staff and not having a specific media relations person on staff. We don't know everyone at the Trib or, just have all those media connections. So it has been helpful to have them on a contract basis. They've been really key in helping to get stories placed locally. And there was a national placement that we had last year when our randomized control trial with the University of Chicago study was initially released. So that has been something that has really helped our external channels as far as different stories that we're able to tell. And they're great to have, to call on them because they're really great storytellers, of course. So in addition to helping to actually get those placements, they are on top of me, on top of us about what's happening. What can we talk about? What are really, some of those mining practices that we have to dig into to find the great stories. So I would say over the past 8 months, they've been really, really helpful. They also have a pulse on what reporters are looking to cover. And as we've kind of said, the stories can be hard to find, but everyone wants to know exactly what's happening. Everyone wants to know how the pandemic is impacting students, and now community college students, Black and Brown students. And so it's really helpful to have them. So I'd say that's what we've been doing at OMD.
Lyric Opera of Chicago is Chicago's largest opera company. In addition to producing largely opera, we also produce musical theater, recitals, concerts. We also have a slate of really amazing community engagement and education programs through Lyric Unlimited that serves more than 100,000 students each year in the Chicagoland area and in all 77 neighborhoods of Chicago. We also, as I mentioned earlier, have an in-house artist training program that is very renowned within the opera world. And, you know, one of the story that I like to tell most about how the pandemic affected us is that just before the opening of the ring cycle, we had the very unfortunate notice about 2 weeks notice that we suddenly had to cancel this multi-million-dollar production. If you aren't familiar with opera, the ring cycle is the largest and most often the most financially difficult piece to produce for an opera company. And it was about 10 years in the making. And then we got cut off at the legs about 2 weeks shy of putting it on stage. So for us, the biggest pivots really had to be about retaining as much revenue as possible, because not only was this cancellation incredibly difficult for us, but it was also in our fourth quarter. So we didn't really have a lot of opportunity to make up for what was a significant ticket loss for us, but also a potential sponsorship loss as well. So what this really allowed us to do actually is get in a lot better touch with our donors and to pick up the phone, call all of them, ask how they're doing, let us know how we're doing as a company, but then ask them to retain their support, to retain their ticket purchases as a contribution. And then, you know, we saw a really great traction off of that, actually. We were able to keep all of our sponsorship support. We were able to keep the majority of our donor support from our Valhalla Circle Giving program, which is tied with our ring cycle. But not only that, we saw a lot of momentum because we were able to share some of those successes with our patrons. We found momentum that when our gift officers were reaching out to donors, or we were reaching out through our direct response vehicles, that people were really invested in our recovery from that enormous cancellation. And what turned out to be, or what might have been a $27 million loss for us, we were able to mitigate the majority of that loss through donor support and through donor retention. So in some ways, obviously it was detrimental and heartbreaking for us, but we really found that our audiences really rally behind us and are really invested in our continued success, which is great. Now, as far as how we sort of had to shift our communication strategy or channels, if you will, we kind of, like I mentioned earlier, focused from having like selling a product and soliciting support to kind of centralizing our chats or our emails about the core mission and how, you know, everything that we're producing, new content, storytelling, audience engagement, all of that is driven from our core mission. And so with that, our audiences actually became even more engaged. Our open rates pretty much doubled. We re-engaged with our blog in exponential growth. I can't even remember what percentage growth it was over the year before, but we also, like you said, use multi-channel, like we do with fundraising, to share, you know, through impact letters and impact reports, to talk about not only like what might have been and what might have been terrible, but because of your support, we were able to do this and recover in this way. And so that way too, not only do they continue investing with us emotionally, but hopefully they'll see the sort of proof in the pudding of their immediate support, and hopefully that we'll be able to grow on that support when we give them a call back in a couple of weeks, probably.
Yeah, I think all the ways that you guys talked about of, sharing those stories and communicating, are just so relevant. And I think too, when it comes to, collecting again that information and content, getting it out there, sometimes it feels like it falls on one person, or just a few people of the team, where you're always trying to search and hound people down to get the stories and find that information. And I think that leads into kind of our next topic is really, what are some ways that, you can really build that culture of philanthropy throughout your entire organization, so that really storytelling doesn't just become, again, the communications department or the fundraising department's job, but it's everyone's job to provide those things to you. So I'd love to hear a little bit on some success that you've had or even challenges, against that, and getting everyone involved in telling your organization's story, to all those that need to hear it.
I can start us off on this one just because we are in the midst of it right now. This year, one of the goals we made for our whole organization, but starting with the communications development, marketing, fundraising department, is an installation that we're calling Mission Moments. And the idea behind installing Mission Moments is to put a name to what we're trying to do that we feel resonates across the organization. In the past, like I said, we have a small staff, and oftentimes when there was a particular story we wanted to tell, we would go to our program staff and say, this is what we're hoping to do. Is this, do you have a scholar that fits this profile, or have you heard of this situation, or how can you be of assistance in, helping us to tell the story on this deadline in this way that we would like to do it? So almost like, a reporter, right? Doesn't always go over that well. So we really wanted to kind of reinvent the way that we bring everyone in the organization into telling stories and recognizing that it really is the best way for the organization to advance its mission, because we need support externally. We want for our scholars and our alum to know that we value their stories, we value their experiences. We're never trying, for there to be any kind of tokenism or exploitation or anything like that. But their stories are incredibly powerful, and it is our responsibility to tell them with fidelity and just the utmost respect and responsibility. So Mission Moments is the idea of everyone thinking about specific instances where we celebrate our mission in action. So it's not necessarily what's the story that we can tell? How do we, kind of make this whole piece come together? What we've asked from our organization is to just think about those instances where you see something happen, or you hear something happen, or you're speaking to a scholar and you think about, oh yeah, that's exactly what we're here for. That's exactly what we're trying to do at 1 million degrees. Whether, it's a scholar who's overcome an obstacle, or, whether it's a financial aid, or whether they're trying to find support services for housing, or whether they're, trying to pass chemistry and they have no idea where to turn. From the biggest thing to some of the smaller things, what are those instances in which you say, aha, that's it. This is why we're here, and sharing those with us. And it's really about creating the habit of everyone in the organization to recognize those small things that happen, so that one, it's really a point of celebration. The more that you kind of try to pick it out and pinpoint it, the more we can all celebrate that we're really making an impact. And then on the other side, for us, especially those of us who are not directly facing with our scholars, it gives us so much more content and proof points that we're able to build stories on. So the idea of the Mission Moments is just kind of bringing everyone into the practice of recognizing the small moments that we can celebrate. And then we're creating a process for those moments to come into my department. So we're doing it through a form right now. Just that we use OneDrive. So a form, this is what happened, and we leave it up to the person who's submitting the form to either anonymize it, or they can say who the story applies to. And that's how we're trying to build our just those little pieces. It may not be big, you know, it could be something small, but that's kind of the idea, is just bringing everyone along in the journey of recognizing really great things to celebrate and letting us know.
Andrea, I love that mission moments nugget. I'm going to steal that. I think it's just wonderful. You know, that's one of the things we've struggled with, is collecting those stories from our staff and then taking them back to our, because of what's going on with this pandemic. You know, a lot of our staff feel disconnected from the mission. They know what they're doing and the work that that's happening with individually or with their individual teams, but don't know what's happening across other programs. And so there's this big disconnect that we're feeling amongst that. We've been trying to figure out ways to get people more connected to the work that they used to be able to see on a daily basis. And that includes everybody from, you know, our frontline staff to our caseworkers, our administrative staff. You know, they all used to have an opportunity to touch the work they were doing. And so, like I said, I love what you're doing there with those mission moments, and I am going to steal that nugget from you.
Yeah, I too, I really like that a lot. Especially we sort of similarly have created a sort of bank of patron quotes that we've, you know, harvested from either surveys or in-person communications. And I think, you know, the easiest way to tell your mission story is to tell it through the voice of your donor, right? So creating that pool of quotes has been really successful for us. But I'd also like to talk about how we're kind of using this time, again, in relation to, you know, telling our story, is really kind of allowing our artists to tell their own story through concerts. So earlier this year, one of our amazing tenors, Lawrence Brownlee, who's African American, we kind of worked with him to curate a concert that featured Black artists and included Black traditional, you know, music from opera to gospel, you know, and everything in between, to talk about like how he wants to tell his story in this moment as we're going through, you know, some of the civil situations that we're in through the pandemic. You know, what does that mean for Black artists, and kind of give them an opportunity to tell their story through song, and therefore, you know, using our mission to drive the conversation forward and to allow opportunities where, unfortunately, often with opera, there aren't as many opportunities to showcase artists of color. So allowing them the platform to not only share their talent, but curate an artistic story is something that I found to be very exciting. And I know we've been able to reach a lot of new audiences that we hadn't before, and, you know, share these stories in a way that is not tokenizing, but is authentic to our mission, is, I think, for a lot of our donors, very satisfying.
God, I think that kind of leads me into what I was thinking about now is, you know, really shifting and think about not only the pandemic issues that we've all experienced, but I think that this year has also brought attention to the increased awareness of racial injustice that, you know, we've seen. And it really has, you know, I think affected the tone for all then of your communications, and you really have to think about it through those different lenses that we're seeing. So I'd love, again, for you guys to elaborate a little bit more on the tone of your communications with, both of those things that we've been dealing heavily with in the last year, and even thinking about too, COVID is, what are the long-term effects? This isn't just kind of existing in a silo. We're seeing again now even kind of a second wave happening. We know that there are going to be long-term effects from it. How does all of that again continue to affect the message that you guys are sending out in your communications?
For us, we're kind of, we've been talking about this a lot lately. And for us, it's marrying the realism of the situation and marrying it with the optimism that we need to feel in order to move forward. Because while the situation for us has become dire to a certain extent, because we don't have earned ticket revenue, and we still have to keep the doors open, if you will, but move forward knowing that we're not going to have product on stage for another couple months or years, whatever it may be. But obviously no one wants to invest in a sinking ship, right? So what we need to do is develop a mission vision, or a vision of like promise that we're going to be here not only with you through this time, but once we're able to reconvene safely, that we're going to be together again. And with that regard, our gift officers especially are approaching our donors with multi-year commitments that we hope will kind of like cement that promise with each other that we're in this together. And so with that regard, it's an opportunity, but certainly there are a lot of questions that are going to remain unanswered for a while. So again, being realistic, not depressing, but realistic, but marrying that with a sense of optimism.
I love that. I love that, Scott. I think you hit the nail right on the head, and that's been pretty reflective of our tone as well. This time period has been interesting, but I think one of the great things that is coming out of it is that the conversation is becoming more, common. It's at the forefront now. And so in our communications, our tone has really shifted a bit to be more direct. As Scott said, it's really about being realistic, and you have to say what it is. You have to call the thing, and that's not something that we had been doing in our communications previously, despite the fact that, as I mentioned, 90% of our population, the students we serve, are in the Black and Brown community. It just hadn't been a practice, and now it is, and I think that's a great thing. And I'm really excited about how we'll continue to retain that optimism that you're speaking about, Scott. I think that's very important as well. One of the things that we are doing right now, we just wrapped we have an event coming up next week, a virtual event, of course. And one of the things we have found in the past is, especially events where scholars and alumni will be participating, which is typically our events when they meet donors or corporate partners or things like that. There have been several instances where, communication has broken down, and there have been some less than positive moments. And this is the first year we're taking such a step to try to avoid that and correct it and just bring awareness to it, that we're putting it in black and white. So for the event that we have coming up, we've created a conversation guide for all of our guests who will be attending the event. The first page of the conversation guide is just an overview of the organization, fun facts. The last 2.5 pages of the conversation guide are specifically about communicating in the space where our scholars and alum will be So it is the guide that says, these are the definitions of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. These things are important to 1 Million Degrees. These are important to the work we do, and it's important for all of those who are coming into our community to understand how important this is, and that we have to all be aware of the things we say and the tone we have, and a lot of the things that we say very commonly in all spaces are problematic and can be harmful. And now it's time to call that thing the thing. So we have this beautiful document. We had it designed by our design agency, and we're sending it out. I'm going to send it out. I sent it out yesterday. That happened yesterday. So a week in advance for all of our guests. Please take a look at it. This is what this means. Here are prompts. Here are some of the things that you should say in networking. We didn't really cover the things that, you shouldn't say. It's more on the positive side. And then also we actually spoke to social identity as well. That's a big thing that, we're, facing in our society, with just not having the common language that makes everyone feel included and comfortable expressing themselves completely. So this conversation guide, I think, is just a huge step forward for us in our communications, and really bringing a full story about OMD and the people we serve to the forefront. So it's been great. And I think, I hope we continue to do, kind of that same thing for all of our events.
Andrea, that's a great piece. I'd love to see it.
Send it over.
For us, we've been, because of our mission and the fact that we primarily serve Black and Brown youth, we've been at the center of a lot of these issues. Even before, you started seeing a lot of the social unrest, but we didn't want to take that for granted. And the fact that many of our supported that work. So we were very intentional about sharing the fact that, we were very supportive of Black Lives Matter, that we recognized what folks were feeling when a lot of these issues were happening all over the country. In fact, and we believed it so much so that we went around and make sure that we put, immediately when we saw something, we wanted to put a message out there and keep it on if you still go on our La casanorte.org, you'll see a message there that we put out to very much everybody. Everyone who comes to our site can see what matters for us, and that we're at the center of this, and that we're supportive of this. We just had our virtual gala. We titled it Justice, Healing, and Hope, because we also wanted to focus in on justice. And, we know that this is an important issue that's happening right now. We want to continue to be advocates for the youth. So we haven't had any of our donor base or anybody accepting that, because like I said, it's always been a part of the work that we do. But at the same time, I think, we talked about storytelling, storytelling, at the end of the day, is really about connecting with individuals emotionally. People, everybody, you hear I believe it was Maya Angelou who said, people don't remember always remember what you say, but they'll remember how you made them feel. And that's a story, and that's what ultimately we want to get across when we tell our story, when we share our mission. We want people walking away with an emotional connection to the work that we do. And in all the conversations we have, we're always very targeted with our audience. I mentioned authenticity is so super important, but then also to remember that while you share things that are going on, our donor base and the individuals that we connect with want to hear the work that we're doing and how, some of the struggles that we're dealing with. But we also want them to walk away knowing that, walking away with hope, that they're hopeful about what the future is going to bring, and that, by connecting with us, they can be a part of that they can also be a part of an organization that's helping families who are at the center of all the issues that we're talking about, and they can feel good about being connected to that mission. And so every conversation, every interaction, we're always intentional about the fact that we want them to walk away with that feeling, to understand the work we're doing, but we also want them to walk away knowing that there is hope at the end of the day.
Well, thank you, guys. I think that's a great thing to kind of end our conversation on. Just knowing that there is hope out there, and we are going to get through this. And again, we are going to continue to just tell the stories of your organizations, as you guys are all continuing to do, and try to be in this together. So I think that's great. I'm going to turn it over to Kelsey now, so that she can kind of finish up and go through any Q&As that some of our audience members might have.
Great. Thank you so much, Stacy, and thanks so much to all of our panelists. I think that we covered most of the questions that came up in chat during the conversation, but had a couple of questions come through, I think, for Andrea. One asking if you'd be willing to share the conversation guide. I think if you are, we're happy to send that to attendees.
I'll send it over.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. And also some curiosity about the virtual event, if it's going to be conversation based. Are you doing that through breakout groups in Zoom or?
Yes, so it will be Zoom. We have a main program. We're welcoming Dr. Austin Goolsby in conversation. He'll be talking to our director of program for about 30 minutes, and then we'll transition into networking breakout rooms is what we're calling it. So all of our guests who are attending the event will split into breakout rooms, and there will be 2 to 3 guests along with 2 to 3 OMD scholars and alum. And there will be 1 room facilitator who is an OMD coach who we've prepped and given questions to, and they're familiar with our program, with our scholars. So the idea is for it to be a small group networking session. So that's what we're doing. So the conversation guide is to help inform that tone and just kind of the feel of that space particularly for our guests. And we're excited to see how it goes. I think it'll be great.
Good luck. Wonderful. Well, thank you all again on behalf of AFP Chicago's Continuous Learning Council. We're just so grateful to you, Andrea, Jose, and Scott, for sharing your expertise, experience, and some really good tactical advice, I think, with us today. And to all of our attendees, thank you for joining us. I want to just quickly pop up on the screen a couple of upcoming programs that we have. Next Thursday, we have our final third Thursday networking event of the year at 5 p.m. Next Friday, our Asian and Pacific Islander Affinity Group will be meeting. And then Friday, December 4th is our last major AFP Chicago program of the year. Our annual meeting will be held from 11:30 to 12. So you're welcome to join us if you are an AFP member and would like to help elect the board for the coming year. And also, we distribute a President's Award and do a couple other things there. And then it will be followed by our awards program. And that was originally delayed from May and then October, but we've got some really wonderful recognition to give out to the philanthropic community here in Chicago, and hope that you'll join us for that. You can, of course, go to AFP Chicago's website and find more information and sign up for all of that. One more thing I'll mention is that if you are an AFP member, the board and some of our committee volunteers are doing a little care call project this month. So expect to get a call from us. We'd love to just thank you for being a part of our community and hear about anything that you might like to see in the coming year. So again, we'll send out an evaluation after this program, and the recording will be available on the website as well. But just want to thank you all very much. If you are a fellow or a speaker staying for the fellows, you can stay right on this Zoom and we'll segue into that. And for the rest of you, we thank you for joining us and hope you have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you.